Welcome on another episode of Creators Corner. I'm your host, James Dale, and with me is a very special guest I met at the 100 Men of Color event. We both were honorees. I'm Daniel M. Howell, the author of The 4 Bs Before Goodnight. How you doing this morning?
All is well. I'm blessed, highly favored. Happy to be here on the show. Thank you for having me, James.
Thank you for answering the call and tell us about yourself.
Yes, so I am a product of Brooklyn, New York City, originally from New York. I'm a dad of 3, husband of 14 years, a first-time author. In my book that you see behind me, The 4 Bs Before Goodnight, a story that was gifted to me during my struggles of COVID. And from those struggles came a wonderful product that assisted me in being more intentional about being the good in that salutation. So before the good night, there are things that you do that go into creating the good in the good night.
Okay, so how did you come about with the concept of Before Goodnight, the book?
So failing as a dad during COVID, 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. One night I hit my bottom as a father, having not been the best version of dad in that final phase of the day. The final phase of the day I see in the 4 phases: good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Good night being that final phase. During COVID, it was just, hey, let's get this thing over with, guys. Y'all have had, everything you could have from me all day. It's been a priority for you. Everything you needed has been provided. Everything you've requested has been provided. I need some time now. Please get in the bed. No, Daddy, you doing the. Please get in the bed. No. And this was just a cycle of things. That last phase of the day was just always prolonged for my, at the time, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and 5-year-old. And it was just a major struggle. So hitting my bottom and, candidly cursing to my boys, in the bed, they were shocked and jarred and crying. I kind of slammed the door and I said, good night. And, just listening to what was happening behind that door and finding myself in the bathroom looking in the mirror, I didn't have the strength, the wherewithal, the know-how to go into, a reset to support what they were experiencing, what I had just done. And I just let the night end. Not able to sleep. I got online and started to look up some things about what people were doing to create bedtime routines and to transition the bedtime. And I stumbled into an article through thehealthychildren.org written by Dr. Laura Jana, a world-renowned pediatrician. And she had a phrase in one of her books called Food Fights, where she coined the 4 Bs. And she goes, you prepare the end of the night by giving your child a bath, getting them ready with a bottle, because this was more about infants. So the transitions for infants, she had the bottle in there. And then it was, you read a book and you put them to bed. And she saw that as the 4 Bs. And, it dawned on me, I'm like, the 4 Bs, like, why does that feel so familiar? And I realized, I was like, wow, everything we do before goodnight starts with the letter B. So randomly one night, I said, hey guys, let's get our Bs started. And they looked at me like, what, the Bs? I said, yeah, everything we do before goodnight starts with the letter B. What's the first B? It became a game. It became a process in which I could go to to support the outcome that I was hoping for and assist them with the experience they were longing for in that final phase of the day. Thus was born the four B's before good night.
Okay, so before this venture, did you ever fathom or have the ambition to become an author, or it was a happens of circumstance?
Yeah, it was circumstantial. Um, it was never a thought. I mean, I am a creative at heart.
Mhm.
My background's in television media production. Prior to moving to Connecticut in New York, I worked for a lighting house called Shine Flu, where we did field production. I was a generator lighting gear technician, and I supported the behind the scenes preparing scenes for to be well lit or to be powered, um, all the things that would go into capturing a shot. So I was always around media from that standpoint, and always thought about, hey, what would it look like? Uh, uh, we would have to. What would it look like if we are going into the concept of a story, and you're always thinking of, oh, well, what if you wrote about this? What if you wrote about that? So writing wasn't something that was foreign to me, but actually deciding to write a book was never something that I thought of. Storytelling was always something I was a part of.
Okay, so did you go the traditional route and get it published, or you were independently published author?
I did go the conventional traditional route because I had no clue as to what to do. So obviously, you hear that the way books are presented to you is typically through a publishing house. So you go through that process because that's what you know. Um, However, that process is very prolonged, and it's not easily accepted or received. Uh, you don't just call someone up and suddenly you have a literary agent and they've taken your manuscript and decided to turn it into a book.
Right, right.
Um,
It's
right?
a
There's a whole
process.
process of
Yeah.
selection that they go through to determine if this story is noteworthy, if it's, if it has a market, if there's an interest, and all the things that go into deciding whether or not your voice is relevant for publishing. My voice is relevant for publishing because this is a story from a human experience that other people need to know about. And if it's something that I'm struggling with, I'm sure someone else is as well. So though it may not be a New York Times bestseller and sell, thousands of copies to date, I've only sold 600. Um, it was something that I needed to exercise in the sense that when considering what it meant to prepare for bedtime, I couldn't find a resource for it. I didn't know how to go about this battle that is bedtime in the war of our children's development, right? So I said, you know what, if this is something I'm struggling with, I think other people need to know that there's an approach that they can take to set up a framework for this process. And I decided to self publish. I raised $13,000 on Kickstarter.
Mhm.
And as a result of that crowdfunding, not only was I able to publish the book, but I was able to purchase materials that support the system that is the bedtime process. The four B's is the concept verbally, but the environment that creates bedtime culture is a product that I call the stations of Goodnight, the four B's. So we gamify the Goodnight process in four stations. We start at the bath, we move our way to the sink for brushing our teeth. We transition to a mat where a book is already one or two books are already positioned for us to read while the child is in bed. So it became stages and steps that supported a child's understanding that this transition has these phases. And this is what we do before I say goodnight to you. I didn't mean to rhyme there, but it
Yeah,
just
you
happened.
did. That was awesome. It was apropos in the moment. So you mentioned you have kids. Did you include them in the creative process of doing your book?
No, not originally. What became the economy from this whole concept, they've become a part of that. But originally, it was really just understanding how we would establish the bedtime culture,
Mhm.
and in doing so, they were my guinea pigs, so to speak. But they didn't know I was creating a story. I didn't know I was creating a story, right? I was living a story, and it didn't come about until I was able to see myself outside of it, process and understand what I had actually just experienced, um, and feeling like there wasn't anything there for me to go to, like a default. I was like, this needs to be something that people have access to. And because it's a universal concept, the concept of saying goodnight, putting our children to bed in that final phase, um, I was very intentional as a person of color to not create a story from a Black dad's perspective. I wanted to choose characters who had texture and feel and a vibe about them, but I wanted to do it from a universal perspective. And anthropomorphic characters are a great way to do that. And I decided to set this all in the landscape of a hive,
Mhm.
and use the play on the word to be. And this whole idea of being, humans being what? Humans being who? And was born the series Before Goodnight. I'm sorry, the four B's. The four B's are the family. The story is Before Goodnight, but that became a series of books that use that whole before concept. Uh, I have five others written. I haven't illustrated them yet. Um, I'm waiting for a process of understanding how I want to launch this.
Mhm.
Um, but as the persona that I've taken on from all that I've learned in this process, the persona is Daddy Different. I chose this moniker, Daddy Different, um, because in the moment where I was failing, I had to remind myself to not default to who I was raised by, um, but to always consider who I want to be to my boys, and that required me approaching things differently. So I went with that whole idea of Daddy Different.
No, that's great. It seemed like you did you structure everything before you published, or did you go do the first book first and then say, okay, I can follow it up with the other books after this one launches?
Great question. I had no real vision for where this was headed. It was something that was a realization in the title, right? So the four B's is about the specific characters, but also a double entendre that relates to what you're learning. So the four B's, as in the family, and then the four B's, the concept of bedtime process, bath, brush, book, bed. But when I finished the title, um, as I was reading it, what stood out to me was before,
Mhm.
and the question was posed in my spirit. It's like, okay, well, if this book is called Before Goodnight, what else is happening before Goodnight? I was like, okay, what else is happening before Goodnight? And it dawned on me one day. It said your whole day happens before Goodnight. I was like, oh, and it said, yeah. So what other stories could you tell about the transition of the day? And the next title hit me. It was Before We Go. Before we go, these things we must do. Daddy knows four. Can you tell me two?
Mhm.
Wash up and get dressed. What a great guess. Then we will eat and clean our mess. Four things we do every day,
Mhm.
even today as adults in our transition, right? And that just, it started to snowball from there, James. Before you make friends, before you fly, before we travel, before we travel. I hope that does not come into the Before Goodnight turned into a series of books that all represent the things we do literally before the good night. Your whole day is happening. Before we go, before you fly, self affirmation, before we make friends, social engagement, before you travel, the understanding of being in public settings, before Christmas Day, right? Before you trash it, a concept built around environmental awareness, waste management, because in advance of any hope for outcome, there are all the things we do before the outcome. Before this, before that, learning made sticky like honey splat.
I think we all in society can benefit from these concepts. It's not just a concept for kids so they can transition from the day and dial down and go to sleep and get ready for the next day, but we as adults who going about our day, our busy day, sometimes it's a mundane existence, to approach it with purpose, to approach it in a way that we understand that being mindful is important and making the decisions that is integral for the next stage in our life can benefit a lot of us. If we understood the four B's, then a lot of people would not make the decision that they have made in their lives. So where do you see the four B's before Goodnight from this point? So you already have the first book. What do you see yourself? Do you see a series? Do you see like merchandise, or is it just for the children's books?
So it's funny you asked that. Thank you so much for that question. It is an expanding concept, and what was realized. I'm a very uh, a kind of introverted kind of thinker,
Mhm.
and I assess things from the standpoint of impact for my choice, but also on others. So when I'm creating, it's not just because I have this desire to, to do this or to do that because I want to put a book out. Um, I'm considering it from the standpoint of what is the impact I'm making in society and humanity. So when this series really started to form, and I had these new titles, and then I started to come up with the rhymes and the basic four elements of every book. Every book has a basic four elements that it's teaching. So before we go, these things we must do: wash up, get dressed, eat, clean our mess. Four, right? Before we make friends, this you should know: being kind helps friendship grow. Sharing, no hitting. Last, don't think twice. To be a good friend, simply be nice, right? Kindness, share, no hitting, be nice. Every book has the basic four elements. So realizing that there was this concept that speaks to what you were saying earlier, James, and this idea that there's a broader impact, I started to think about what we call ourselves humans being. And I'm using this whole play on bees. And I started to question, I'm like, well, typically in life, they're asking us, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? That's what we're asking kids very early on in their development. However, we all know present day, no one knows what they want to be, right? That's the exception to the person who names the one thing that they ultimately become. They are the exception. The rule is you're interested in things because they're colorful, they're familiar, they sound nice, they look good. Uh, it has nothing to do with the impact you're hoping to have in society, right? So I decided to rephrase that question and say, who are we going to be today? Let's focus on our who. And as a result, I created this concept in expansion of the four B's. I call the B economy. You being the best of you, me being the best of me. The economy of who we are related to the impact of our decisions, but driven by who we're deciding we're going to show up as that day. And it starts with monikers like Daddy Different, deciding to consider a different way to do things, to see things, to hear things, to receive things, to be very intentional about the impact. So to your question, this has become something far greater than what it started out as a book. I've already developed the economy into 30 characters. who all have a play on the word "be" in their name. Um, uh, it's either used before their name or after their name. For example, oughta be. Oughta be is a character who is questioning whether or not society should tell him who he ought to be, or if he's deciding who he wants to be. So I call him oughta be. Sounds like a bee who works on automobiles, but he actually jars honey, right?
Mhm.
That's oughta be. Then you have will be, right? He's a character who's very confident, self-assured, and he's driven by all of the things he's assured that will happen. To characters like maybe, just be, fave be. I even have a antagonist. Be partisan, right? So the economy is a concept that is large in scale as it relates to these characters of disposition who are making affirmative statements about who they are, and that's actualized and manifested in their names. That's something that I am taking my time with as to how I'm going to approach releasing that, because I need to understand its movement and how I manipulate it. But that's where it's come thus far, James.
Yeah, that was my next question. I wanted to know if those four characters was named after the four Bs, and you just pretty much answered the question. So the four main characters on the book cover, what are their names?
Great question. So they are the four Bs. They're the family of four Bs, but they didn't start out with names. After I came up with the economy, I had to give them names.
Mhm.
So I did already mention oughta be. Oughta be is Father B. He's the first B that you see there on looking at me on my
The
left.
Afro?
Yes, with the afro. Now I noticed that you noticed his curly hair,
Yeah.
right? I was very intentional about characters that had texture, feel, and even culture. So although I did, and hue, I don't know if you noticed that they have a goldish hue. They're
Mhm.
not yellow,
Mhm.
right? Most bees in the way they've been depicted in society and media, they just make them this kind of light, bright, and yellow.
Mhm.
I decided to give them a honey golden hue that would allow us to see them in these varying stages of texture and color. So that's oughta be. Right next to him is his daughter, B flat. She loves to sing, but everybody tells her she sings flat.
Mhm.
But what is it to sing flat, right? Singing is actually the manifestation of the soul's joy. So who's to tell you that the joy of your soul is flat? There's the theory of music and the spirit of music,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So B flat is on a journey to understanding that your noise is joyful, despite how the theory of music would stranglehold it and say, well, that's flat and that's not good for Carnegie Hall. Well, I'm not trying to sing in Carnegie Hall. I'm singing while I'm making this sandwich. I'm
Right.
singing because the kid on the playground is a little sad, right? I'm singing to just manifest my joy in the world.
Mhm.
So I decided to name her B flat, and on her outfit she has musical notes. That brings me to a character that's her brother. His name is Wannabe.
Mhm.
Now in our community, that's seen as a very negative thing, to want to be someone else or want to be something that you see from the standpoint of not just being you. However, this is a child, right? And he wants to be everything that he sees. He wants the opportunity to be anything that he can think of. And he shouldn't be limited to anything else. His imagination should give him the opportunity to be anything he wants to be. So I
Mhm.
decided to call him Wannabe. And that brings us finally to the Queen Bee, or I had to change her name because I know that there's already a Queen Bee,
The Queen Bee, yeah.
Beyonce, right? I didn't
Lil
want
Kim,
the
Lil Kim
beehive
is
coming
Queen
after me
Bee.
with my whole theme of bees.
Mhm.
And, I said, maybe I shouldn't call her Queen Bee, although it's apropos in context. from a cultural standpoint, we already have a queen bee, Beyonce. So I said, let me think of something different for her. And I landed on Be Loved. And she's actually framed around my wife's disposition. My wife doesn't always allow herself to be loved. She's constantly giving to the hive,
Mhm.
but doesn't quite know how to receive what it means to be loved. And I think that's a part of something we want to address in society. What does it mean to allow yourself to be the recipient of love, to be deserving of love, to recognize that you too should be showered, should be acknowledged, held up, and the priority? Although in context, you may be the one who's always conventionally given. In this setting, you should also too learn how to be loved.
Mhm.
James, I don't know if these names stand out
Oh
in
yeah, they
anything
do. They
else.
do. It very much resonates with me because I'm from New York myself, and when you mentioned wannabe, it hit home. It resonated with me because, like you said, that was a negative connotation with individuals who wanted to be somebody else and not themselves. But as an impressionable kid, you have to aspire to something. Nobody is born into
Mm,
they are today. You have to learn and see what things that you want to, be. So having the name wannabe is a great name because you get a chance to explain that concept. It's kind of like the whole adage of the Negro in the stories back in the days. You are Uncle Tom, where nobody really do the research of Uncle Tom and know that he was the hero of the book. But for the negative standpoint of it, calling somebody's Uncle Tom has a negative stigma to it, and to be a wannabe has a negative stigma. So you have the opportunity to explain the importance of being a wannabe because you have purpose, you have drive, you have a vision for yourself to be something more than just a voyeur. You want to be aspired to be
mm.
as an individual, and that's great. That's apropos, and that is a learning thing for us in society. This, like I said when I first met you, when you told me about the book, this is more than just a children's book. It's like a onion that's being peeled with every story and every different character. And I love the way you put it all together to be digestible for your readers.
And I appreciate that. I got a lot of pushback on keeping his name as wannabe.
Mm.
Um, and for the most part, I'm like, well, if it creates a conversation, for me, that's the opportunity.
Let's have it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want you to tell me your perspective on what I've created. I want to hear your perspective, but not with the intent for me to change something because what I intended is happening.
Mm-hmm.
We're having this conversation. I love that it resonates with you. Of all the names, it's the one I felt like people would definitely resonate with and have either a visceral reaction to, um, uh, but some kind of reaction and provoke conversation. Which at the end of the day is something that we are very uncomfortable in doing. Like, stand in the skin of who you know yourself to be and what your point is. If it's not from the standpoint of wanting to harm someone, um, stand fast in that. This
Mm-hmm.
this that you are entitled to believe and feel everything you believe in and feeling, and I should know it too, so I can decide whether or not I want to continue to be around you.
That's true. That's true. Be honest. That's the thing. That
Yeah,
should be
like
the
keep
number
it
six book.
real.
Be honest. You got to be
Be
honest.
honest. Look at that. Come on, man. I look. I don't. So I don't. I try not. So certain things that relate to direct behavior, I try not to make so obvious. Right. I wanted the name specifically to have I have this one character. Her name is Kobe.
Mm,
Right? She's an athlete. She wears purple and gold.
mm,
She wears the number 42.
mm,
And she's framed around this character that such a, I had a difficulty in accepting as an athlete, recognizing how extraordinary they are as a talent, but hearing all of the backlash about them as a teammate, you know, I just didn't know how to resonate with this amazing person who I've been watching since Hoops Magazine in his oversized jersey in Lower Merion High School. Kobe Bryant is an amazing athlete with a mindset that you would have no understanding of the drive behind all of his actions until his unfortunate passing. You got to learn so much more about Kobe from these stories that people were now willing to tell that spoke to a spirit of who he was that we could never understand because all we saw was him winning, not really being in the media or in public settings, and then the book around whether or not he pushed Shaq out and how Shaq felt about him or how this person wanted to be his teammate or didn't. All of the negative stuff. And that was the impression I had about Kobe until his unfortunate passing and hearing about these stories. I decided to name a character that had a pun on his name to speak to the spirit of who he is, who he was, um, from the standpoint of athletics, but to juxtapose what people thought about him. So
mm,
Kobe doesn't play basketball. In my economy, Kobe is spelled Cobee. It has the hyphen, and she actually plays soccer,
mm.
ultimate team game, right? Um, Winning has to happen with everyone. So that takes us back to the co. We need to be a community. We
Mhm.
need to cooperate. We need to collaborate for this common goal. Thus, Kobe. I can refer to the character that I grew to love in the basketball player, but frame that whole negative story around who we understood him to be from a selfish standpoint based on what the stories media told us and the stories he wasn't telling us at the time, but ultimately to learning that he was just the ultimate team team leader who wanted to pull the best out of every player for a central goal, and that was to win.
Yeah, we have to coexist. And
Ooh.
before we wrap up, I want you to tell my audience where we can find the four B's before good night.
So this is where I've been failing in my, in my entrepreneurship. I'm not soliciting, how to purchase and where to find my book. I position this book to be purchased by organizations, agencies, and foundations because this kind of information should be made accessible to families, should be made accessible to parents. It should be made accessible. So my targets are always there. But if you have learned anything today that inspires you or that you have a desire to patronize, please find me at www the word B, the number four, Goodnight, b4goodnight.com. There you can find the books and all of the products that relate to what you've learned and heard about today. And yeah, I have inventory in stock and you'll have it within a week.
All right.
Oh, I don't know if you noticed, there are three versions of this book.
Mhm.
There is a mother and mother book, a father and father book, and a conventional mother and father book. I was raised in a lesbian household. My mother's a lesbian, so I saw two women as it relates to my process of bedtime. If that represents your family, there is an option for that as well. James, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to continuing to have this conversation and presenting more about the B economy.
On that note, I thank you, Mr. Howell, for coming in and showcasing your talent on Creatives Corner. And I am your host, James Dale, and see you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time.